And they were concerned about when the British were colonizing India, that we need to write history again. And there's three things we need to study. One is the seerah, because new generations will ask different questions about Rasulullah and why he is central and important to them. In order for the young generations to love Rasulullah, to understand him, to understand his message, to understand Nubuwwah, to understand the Sharia, to understand Islam, they need to engage with his life story. Of course they do. And any Muslim who's not engaging with his life story, that's a deficiency. Number two, they said that Muslims needed to understand the history of the Ummah, to understand what it meant to belong to the Ummah. When I was in America giving a similar talk like this in the masjid, I asked young people, it was a high school, what does it mean to belong to the Ummah? And they said Gaza, they said the Uyghurs, they said the Rohingya. And for me that made me uncomfortable, that they saw the Ummah as only people who are oppressed. That was the mindset when they understood Ummah, because when they hear Ummah, they hear by and large the activism that happens, and that's the only thing they engage with. And I said, what about the Ummah that came before you? Is there an Ummah that came before you? They said, yes, teacher. And what about the Ummah of the future? Yes, teacher. So the idea of the Ummah goes beyond time and space, right? It's not just restricted to today, right now. The idea, when you're thinking from the paradigm which they call the Ummah-centered paradigm, it means you're thinking or you recognize that there were people that came before you that are part of your lineage, they belong to you. And there are people who you have not seen yet who are going to be part of this Ummah. Understanding their history then becomes important. Because Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran that I've made you different tribes and nations and people so that you may know one another. He's not saying you must become one another, that you become smelted to the point that you lose your identities. He's saying that you may engage and know about each other in many ways. And then the third thing the ulama in India said was we need to write the history of the Muslims in India, the countries you are from. This becomes important here. So what I would suggest to this community, and I suggest to every community, is that you have sessions where you teach seerah in the masjid, so that Muslims are engaging with this aspect of their deen. That you teach them the history of the Muslims of Islam, not just the Salahin and the Ayyubids, but also the moments where there were challenges, there were difficulties. So they understand the vastness of this Ummah, they understand the glory of this Ummah, they understand what it means to have Iman. And then to understand your histories. Your histories from, if you're from Bosnia, Albania, or from Palestine, to your histories of the fact that you are Muslims in Sweden and in Lund. So that your children may understand, the next generation may understand what it means to belong. And these are important things. Now what I'm going to do though, is then explain to you that history writing is then a serious endeavor. And this is a university city, so we should have access to resources in this city, where we should be encouraging people to do in history. My mother, may Allah Ta'ala be pleased with her, when I said I want to be a historian, she said, who's going to pay you to think? Get a proper job. Right? And this is why so many Muslims go into the STEM subjects. But right now, with the current situation in Gaza and then what's happening in Iran and the region, now's the time where we need people who know how to think. Not everybody in the Ummah is privileged enough to be able to go to university and so forth. But as a community, we should be creating environments where we can encourage some of these young people to study the intellectual vocations so that they can think. And I often encourage, the reason why I'm explaining this to you is that if a young boy or girl comes to you in this community and can't afford it, then we do a collection for them, just like we do collections for mosque projects and for water wells and so forth, to put them into the universities so that they become thinkers for this Ummah. Because Hussein will tell you this, he and I both know this. Being part of the Muslim community and going into these intellectual spaces, it's not easy, it's privilege. It's privilege. We're not supposed to be there. We're not supposed to be in those spaces. But we need it. We need people now who can diagnose their reality and so forth. We need people who can think within the political framework. We need people who can think within the intellectual framework, within the historical framework. This is why I went into history, because I wanted to be that type of thinker. Now, one of the interesting things about history and why it's important is Muhammad Iqbal, the thinker from the Asian subcontinent, philosopher and so forth. He says in the Quran there are 3 ayats, or ayats in the Quran, 3. He says number 1, the ayats themselves. And he says that they are signs. The word ayah means sign. We translate it as verse, but in actuality it's a sign from Allah Ta'ala. So each ayah can stand independent, right? And if it's a sign from Allah Ta'ala, that means each ayah you must reflect and contemplate over it. So when you read Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, you should think, what does that mean? These are not just words we're saying, right? And each ayah does not contradict the ayah that came before, and doesn't contradict the ayah that comes after. It's unique in this way. So Iqbal said these are something that Allah Ta'ala has told us to think about. Yes, the Quran is an easy book, but the Quran is also a difficult book, because it's challenging the way you think. He said the second ayahs you see in the Quran are the rules of nature or the cosmos, that Allah Ta'ala continuously explains to us scientific explanations about the rules of the cosmos. The things about the sun, the moon, mountains, about the planets, about the night, the day, and so on. He said that Muslims have engaged quite extensively regarding the scientific explanations in the Quran. What's unique about the rules of the cosmos is Iqbal said that the Quran was not in contradiction to the reality of the cosmos. For in actuality, the Quran came to conform, show you conformity of the cosmos. What's unique, he also says, which is really fascinating, is if you look around you in the rules of the cosmos, fundamentally, if you study it well, it leads to Allah Ta'ala. You can't escape them. Then he said finally, the last ayats in the Quran is the ayats of history. That Allah Ta'ala in the Quran mentions historical moments in it. Why? Why would he do that? Well, why does he mention about Nuh alayhi salam, and Lut alayhi salam, and Musa alayhi salam? The Quran so often is a biography. I used to say this to my students, that the Quran is your first seerah book. Okay, it's a biography of the life of Rasul sallam. Because each surah, each ayah has come from Rasul sallam. And I remember when I was in Egypt that there was some of the ulama, and when I lived in Syria, one of them, he was teaching the seerah from the order of wahi. The order of revelation, he was teaching seerah in accordance to that. So you understood the seerah and you understood the Quran at the same time. It's a very beautiful way of doing it. Now the rules of history are important because once again, insan is in conformity with history. Now the way that we're writing history right now, the question is the issue is that when you want to learn something about the past, why is it important? Why is the Ottoman Empire important? Why is it that the Ottomans banned coffee important? People ask me these questions all the time, and I tell them, I said, when you're doing history, one of the significant things about history is you're not actually asking about the past, you're asking about now. That's what you're asking. There's a sensation or a deficiency or struggle you have now, and then you said, in the past, how did they do that? Why did they do it like this? What about the Mughals? What about the Mongol invasion? The reason why I'm explaining this to you is because there's a lot of YouTube videos right now that teach you history, but what's the point? What's the point of the information? What's the point of understanding about the Mongol invasion? What's the point? What's the point reading about the Crusades? There has to be a reason why you need to know this history. This is another job of the historian, because insan forgets. Ins, the idea of insan in itself, is the one who forgets. And this is why we do azkar, we do zikr of Allah Ta'ala all the time, because ironically, if we didn't do that, we would even forget that. we would forget that so quickly. This is why we pray 5 times a day. The idea is so that we do not forget that Allah Ta'ala is constantly. And when we look at the world around us, when you look at some of the crimes that people are committing, have you forgotten that Allah Ta'ala created you? That's how quickly people can forget. Tonight they're praying Taraweeh, Tahajjud in the morning, they can forget. Many of the ulama, they used to say when somebody does an act of haram, at that moment they have forgotten Allah Ta'ala. They forgot. This is important in that sense, and understanding that. So we as historians, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring you in conformity with that. Now Iqbal said another interesting thing. He said the rules of the cosmos and the rules of the Quran do not contradict the rules of the human experience. That insan is part of the rules of the cosmos. That when Allah Ta'ala created insan, that they are not independent from the rules of the cosmos. They submit to it. In that sense, everything submits to Allah. Everything does. And insan is no different. The only exception for insan that makes them unique than the stars, the sun, the moon, the mountains, is they have free will. That Allah gave them the ability to choose what's right and wrong. And as a result of that, that is why we became more elevated than the angels. Because we have the ability to choose, and we choose to worship. But everything else, we're not in control of it. Now the reason why this is important, and I'm trying to explain this to you, is because when we write history from a Western academic lens, we don't write it within the context of an Iman-orientated way of writing. And I think one of the things I'm trying to encourage more Muslims is to understand what an Iman-orientated way of writing history is. That when we're writing history, that it should elevate our Iman. But in order to understand that, we need to understand what it means to be human right now. We historians write about time. And the way that Western historians write about time is straight line. But it's not a straight line like this, it's a line like this, progress. We're continuously progressing, so we're going forward. But while we are progressing, the past becomes irrelevant. Because we are better than the people that came before, is the mindset. Now, what you actually see in the notion of progress is you become dislocated from the past. You don't have an imagination of the future. It's a continual present. It's the now. That's it. What's happening today. And so what insan becomes is a unit in which they only understand themselves in units of the present, today. What do I need to do today? And that's it. Now what history does, technically, it should explode that out. So, in Islam, time is not linear. It's cyclical. It's a cycle. This is important to understand this. Because from Allah Ta'ala we came, and to Allah Ta'ala we return. It's a cycle. The Quran itself is not linear as a kitab. There's no beginning, there's no end. There's an opening in the Fatiha, but technically one could read the Quran by just opening it anyway. And so forth. The Quran deliberately disrupts our understanding of being straight line. Now what I'm trying to do is disrupt this, what we call straight line thinking. So, in the olden days, when they wanted to know what day it was, they didn't need calendars. They would look at the moon. The moon would tell them, today is the 1st of Ramadan. Today is the 15th of Shaban. They could look outside and they could see the circulation of the moon, and it would tell them that. They would tell you, for example, what time Salah was, and they didn't need the mobile phone. The sun would tell them that. My mum, she's quite unique. Only recently we were fasting and the azan went off on TV. We have a channel called in England, Islam channel. And my mum's still drinking her tea. I said, what are you doing? My mum opens the curtain, looks outside, goes, no, I have a few more minutes. Now in actuality, she understood the fiqh better than me. Because technically, it's not about, it's about the sun itself. And she looked outside and said, the TV is 2 minutes ahead of us. This is the wrong time for us. She understood, not only that, she used to say to my sister and I, come home before it gets dark. She never said a time. She said, when it gets dark, come home before then. The way that she lived her life from Pakistan and so forth was she was in conformity with the rules of the cosmos. She understood the cycles of time. It's not only that. The night and the day, Allah Ta'ala says, are a cycle, right? I had a student once said, you can't pray Salat al-Isha after 12 o'clock. I said, why not? Because it's a new day. I said, since when in Islam did 12 o'clock become a new day? Because it become conditioned in a modern way of telling the time, right? This is a problem in many ways. Now, I'm telling you about this linear thinking because it sounds strange. In the Ottoman Empire, when the clocks came, in the 19th century, in the Muslim world, when the clocks came, it didn't only change the way we told the time, it changed our perception of time. Before, you would say to someone, I'll meet you after Salat al-Asr. There was a malleability. Allah Ta'ala, He gives you room for Salah. But after the Industrial Revolution, the clock came, I'll meet you at 9 o'clock, on the dot. You finish work at 5, on the dot. Your life became a set of units. Now in the Ottoman Empire, what's interesting is they had the muezzin. What's the job of the muezzin? To tell you the time. That's what he's doing. The name of Salah is not the name of Salah, it's the name of time actually. Salat al-Fajr, Fajr is the time in the morning. Maghrib is the time. Those names are of time itself. And the muezzin is telling you what time of the day it is. It's just that Salah was integrated with the rules of the cosmos so that people understood it. In the Ottoman Empire, they had a person called a muwakkit. It's interesting. Every morning at Salat al-Fajr, the clock would be 12 o'clock and he'd make the adjustment. The only person who does that today is in Medina. They still have that in Medina. If you go in Medina, Masjid al-Nabawi, there's a person every morning, he's from India, he still has his job and he changes the clock in the morning. And a lot of young people go, what's that? Why is it 12 o'clock at 4 in the morning? Because they were counting the time in accordance to the sun, right? Now the clock is interesting because it was a mechanical clock. It was changing the way we were doing things. It was changing our perception of time. But it was still cyclical. But today we have digital clocks. 5:51, 6:22. They unitize time to the point that time is a unit. It's disconnected. It's dislocated from what comes before it and what comes after it. Like this clock at least, you can see the numbers, you know what's coming. But when it says 5:51, you can't see that. You can't see it at all. And this atomization of time is an indication of how history is understood. When we're writing history, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. We understand it as straight line thinking, straight line theory. And Islam is not like that. Islam is not like that. And I think this is one of the points I want to highlight to you, that I'm trying to make the adjustment in the way that you think. Because in the Islamic way of understanding time, you'll start to change the way you see yourself. An example. Allah Ta'ala is the accelerator, right? And this is one of His names, that He brings things forward, He accelerates. And how does He do that? If I had an orange and I put it on the table, and the sell-by date of the orange is that it will go off in 3 days' time, it's very possible that I can have an orange and it can go off tomorrow. It can become spoiled tomorrow. And what's interesting about this orange is one day it's fine, and the next day it rapidly declines. It accelerates in its declining state. My father, he's 75 and he's not a good 75 because people from the Asian subcontinent, they don't have a good diet. When he was 74, he was okay. In the space of 1 year, he is rapidly declining. There's an acceleration. And Allah Ta'ala is showing you in the rules of the cosmos that things accelerate. In the winter, the nights are longer. In the summer, it's the day. When you move away from unitary way of looking at time and you look at time in different perspectives, you start to understand things very differently. Now, why am I explaining this to you? Because as historians, one of the things we're talking about is that right now we're in an acceleration moment. Post-Gaza, there's an acceleration. We would call October 7th, as historians, an acceleration moment where a trigger happens and things start to feel very quickly. Everything's moving very quickly. Bang, 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 bang. Insan forget that because they look at time as units. But if you actually look at the human experience, something is happening. We can feel it. The collective soul knows it. That the pieces are moving very fast. We have moments like this in World War I, World War II, Mongol invasion, where there's long moments of peace and then suddenly things start moving very quickly. This is what Iqbal would argue is an indication that time belongs to Allah Ta'ala. And He accelerates when He sees fit. And He slows down when He sees fit. Now what's unique about this is, as a historian, one of the things that I've understood is that Allah Ta'ala can accelerate something and delay something at the same time. He can accelerate the collapse of the Western Hemisphere and He can slow down the victory for the Ummah at the same time. There's no contradiction here. And the reason why this is important is because one of the reasons why we study history is to understand what's happening in the world today. And something is changing fast. Now people often ask me about the victory of Allah Ta'ala, when will it come? And Surah Nasr is an interesting surah because we say, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ. Now Allah Ta'ala in that first ayah talks about time, His time. The Nasr of Allah Ta'ala begins before the Fath. Insan thinks the Fath is the victory of Allah Ta'ala. But Allah Ta'ala mentions His victory before the opening. But Insan doesn't look at the ayahs that Allah Ta'ala puts in front of them to see when things are changing in front of them. Because what they see as victory is absolute victory. Like winning a trophy, 1-0, the cup final. They forget the process. And what's interesting here is the Nasr of Allah Ta'ala is His. It belongs to Him, not to us. It's His victory. We are just people who want to be vehicles for that. That's all we ask. This is why when you say Nasr Allah, you say Shukr Allah Ta'ala as well. It belongs to Him. And as a historian, one of the things I can tell you is the Nasr of Allah Ta'ala has begun. I can see it. We've seen this before. Now, this could be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It doesn't matter. But something is changing. It's not an irony that the Hasbara of the Zionists is being exposed. It's not an irony that the activities of the UAE have been exposed. It's not an irony that we're seeing the leaks of the Epstein files and so forth. These are all coming out one by one, one by one. Now, why is this important? Because when we do history, it's not just about the past. It's not just about the present. It's about the future. What imagination of the future do you have for yourself? What imagination? And this is important because I told you that history is not a straight line. If it's not a straight line, that means there are multiple possibilities of what the future could be like. Because in the narrative of straight line thinking, you're only given one possibility of what the future could be like. And it's a Western possibility. It's a Western imagination of AI, and we're going to Mars, and the non-West is not important, and so forth, and so forth. And religion is dead, and so on, and so on. This is a really reductive way of understanding the possibilities, and Allah Ta'ala can teach them a lesson by changing everything overnight, in many ways. Now, why are multiple imaginations necessary? I'll give you an example. The Moroccan philosopher, I think, Taha Abdurrahman, he said when the communist state, the USSR, collapsed, the Ummah made two mistakes. Mistake number one is the Americans filled the vacuum because we didn't anticipate the possibility of that empire collapsing, just like today. We are incapable of anticipating the possibility of the Western Hemisphere collapsing. Because they tell us it's going to be here forever. Because this is progress. We are the most enlightened human beings in the history of humanity. But history tells you that there are cycles, continuously. The empires come and empires fall. Nations come, nations fall, and so forth. But what Islam tells you is that Islam will be here until the end of the Day of Judgment. That's a constant, because that's a promise from Allah. So now, the point I'm making here is that not only did we allow the Americans to fill the vacuum, but then we were incapable of giving dawah to the people of the ex-communist states. The Tajiks, the Kyrgyz, the Uzbeks, the Albanians, the Romanians, the Bulgarians. It all went. And the people had to find it themselves. Now the reason why that's important is because when you're doing history, you're learning from history, you're supposed to be able to anticipate the possibility that something else is happening. If, for argument's sake, this empire collapses within the next 50 years, where's the Ummah right now? It's not sufficient just to be reactionary. Once it happens, now what do we do? You're supposed to educate your children of the possibility of the future. And this possibility of the future is not just about collapsing of empires. There's a reason why there's so many hadith about the Day of Judgment. There's reasons why Rasul Sallallahu is telling us about the Dajjal and so forth. Because life is one big cycle as well. And so in that sense, when I was young and we used to talk about this hadith about the future, we used to laugh. We say, oh, what are they talking about? That guy with one eye and stuff. Are you kidding me? And yet, what I learned from the ulama that were teaching me these hadith was that they were maintaining it as a memory in our minds, so that when those conditions occurred, it wasn't strange for us. It wasn't alien. We were ready. We knew. In that sense, then the writing of the past and the writing of the future is the same. To maintain the memory of it so that it's not alien to you. You're not dislocated and you're not caught out off guard from this. The current AI turn, I say this openly, is very Dajjalic. Because haqq and batil is the whole point in the way that we look at the world. Haqq does not only mean truth, it means the thing that is real. The haqq is something which is real. And batil is not just falsehood, it's the thing that is not real. So when you go on the internet, and you're looking at AI, and you're looking at deepfake, and you're looking at the propaganda on the news, and so forth, I can't tell what is real and what is not real. For the last 3 days I've been watching videos of Netanyahu being killed. And I'm going to my friend, is this for real? Or is this AI? I can't make the distinction anymore. And I'm trained. We are entering a phase where the distinction between haqq and batil is becoming very difficult. Very difficult. My mum was watching a video of Mamdani in America, and she goes, look, he's speaking to all these white people in Urdu. I said, no, Mum, this is deep fake. This is like, and she goes, what do you mean deep fake? Look, I can see he's speaking Urdu. Look, his lips are moving. I said, no, then I have to speak to her in her language. I say, the internet, it does that these days. She goes, what do you mean the internet does that? I said, they've learned. They've got these computers, they can do that. It's batil, in many ways. Why this is important is because those of us who were historians, when we did history about the Ummah, our job was to do haqq and batil, to make sure that what we wrote was true and what we wrote was real. For example, Ibn Khaldun used to argue that sometimes the ulama, they wrote history that was devoid of reality. They'll say 10,000 people fought in this war, and you say it was impossible to have 10,000 people in that space. Don't do that. Don't make up those exaggerations. And the reason why I'm explaining this to you is because on YouTube today, we have people who give stories of history and they create exaggerations that are not real. This is not okay. This is not why we do history. So the objective for me then, to teach you guys, or why I'm trying to help you understand history to many ways, is I want you to understand who you are, I want you to understand who you were, and I want you to understand who you're going to be. Because in the academic space, and I know this as a Muslim, they tell you who you are, they tell you who you were, and they tell you who you ought to be. And it's not going to happen like this. So this is why I'm making the argument, and the point I'm making to you is why Islamic history becomes important. It becomes important for this thing, that we historians are not just telling you stories. That's not what we're trying to do here. What I spoke to you today is about 3 important ideas. Memory. Memory matters. If you don't have a memory of something, it doesn't. I'll give you an example, the Palestinians. The Israelis didn't only take away their land and their money and their lives, they took away their they're trying to take away their memories away from them. And how do they do that? If we kill enough people, they won't remember what this place was like before us. This is the colonial powers have done this everywhere. They go, they ransack a place, raise it down to the ground, and then the next generation doesn't know what came before them. But not only that, they take away their memories by taking away buildings. They destroy masajids. They take away street names. They take away food from you. So, oh yeah, that falafel you make, it's actually Israeli, we made it. They start eradicating things from your memory to the point that you become dislocated from the past. Now what's unique about the Palestine question, alhamdulillah, is that it's attached to the Islamic question. So we can still maintain the memory of what's happening, collectively. We can still uphold that. The second thing I said was about time. That we need to change the way we understand time. And the third thing is about, and the reason why I'm saying we need to understand about time is because I had somebody from my political movement once come to me. He goes, yes, Dr. Yaqub, you talk about time, but Allah Ta'ala says the victory is very close. I said, what you think is close and what Allah thinks is close are 2 different things. We are very impatient. We want victory now. But what have we done for that victory? For Allah Ta'ala, 1,000 years is like this. That's still victory is qareeb to Him. But for us, you want it tomorrow. And this is why in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala continuously reminds us of having sabr. Because it's one of the hardest things for insan. But this is important. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing the activity. But I'm saying to you that it's very possible that this activity could be generational. And this is why I teach my students, and when I come to the masjids, you should have a 3-generational plan. Your vision should be 3-generational. Sahaba, Tabi'in, Tabi'in. Grandfather, father, son. There's a connection between these. And 3 generations is 100 years. It's feasible to have a 100-year plan. Grandfather, father, son. And then after 100 years, you reset and you go again. That 3-generational plan is important. People don't have this 3-generational plan. Now what's interesting is the hadith about the mujaddid is also about every 100 years a mujaddid comes. And some ulama say it's an individual, and some ulama say it's many people. This moment that we're going through right now should be a mujaddidi moment. Not a tajdeed, but a mujaddidi moment where we should have visionaries from the ummah standing up to say this is enough. Like Islam never came just for Muslims, it came to change the dunya. And the way that the dunya is heading right now is unacceptable. So then this 3-generational vision is important. And you will see, this is why Khaldun's theory talks about 3 to 4 generations. Because it's in, if I said to you, imagine 500 years in the future, you can't do it. But I can give you an imagination and a vision for 3 generations. That in 3 generations, where will this community be? Right? And the last point is imagination. Imagination is needed. We need imagination to understand our place. So when I'm teaching you history, you weren't there. I have to help you imagine what happened. So I'm writing right now on the relationship between Jibreel alayhi salam and Rasul sallam. And I have to tell my students, I say, so when Rasul sallam is in the cave, imagine it. They go, okay. I said, now close your eyes. They go, why, teacher? He's in the cave, it's dark. There's no lights in the cave. He was in the darkness of the cave. And then they look at me and go, oh, okay. I said, when Jibreel alayhi salam came to him and he squeezed him, how did he squeeze him? And one of my students went like this, teacher. I said, how do you know? And they go, what do you mean, teacher? Did he come as a man? I don't know, teacher. The hadith doesn't say he came as a man. Rasul says that Jibreel alayhi salam came to me and I became enveloped by him. And I felt a squeeze in pressure. It's natural to assume he came as a man because other hadith later talk about Jibreel alayhi salam coming as a man, but not in the cave. Not in the cave. There are many ulama who said it could have been a possibility of a light that came to Rasul. It wasn't in a human form. Now this is very unique because I want you to imagine this. The similarities of Rasul are similar to Yunus alayhi salam. He was in the darkness of the night, of the darkness of the stomach of the whale, of the darkness of the sea, of the darkness of the stomach of the whale. So my students always go to me, well, how do you know that Rasul was in the darkness of the night? I say, because the hadith was in Ramadan, and it was saying Qadr. That's the night. And then the darkness of the cave. And then the darkness of Jibreel alayhi salam enveloping him. He was in 3 layers of darkness. In fact, when Waraka bin Nawfal asks Rasul sallam, what did you see? He doesn't ask him, what did you see? The word isn't nazara. It's ra'ya. He goes, what did you experience? He's blind, so we assume because he's blind, he's asking Rasul sallam, what did you see in the cave? That's not what he's asking. He understands he was in the cave. What did you experience? And Rasul sallam explains it to him. So I tell my students, I want you to imagine this. Why? Because I explained to my students that when you are asleep and you close your eyes, you only wake up if you hear something or if someone touches you. When Rasul is in the cave, he can't see anything. So his ears have to hear the Quran and he's squeezed to understand he's awake. Because the eyes are not telling you that. And when he's explaining it to Waraka, this experience, Waraka understands. And what's unique is that Rasulullah does indeed memorize the Quran. He says, I can't do it, but he explains to Waraka and he tells him the ayahs of the Quran. Now what's even more interesting here is that Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran that the Quran used to go into the heart of Rasulullah. So in the cave on the night of Laylatul Qadr, in Ramadan, the Quran was entering his heart. That's why he was feeling squeezed. Imagine it. Because Allah tells us this in the Quran. And Allah tells us that Jibreel alayhi salam is the spirit. And that when the Quran went to Rasul's heart, it was heavy. He felt it. That's why he's shaking. That the Quran was entering him. And this is something we may not understand. But I want you to imagine it. This is why the imagination becomes important. That for us as historians, and this, what I'm telling you about Jibreel alayhi salam is not stories. I went through so much hadith literature. I went through the Quran itself. Like it's unique because the ayats of the surahs of the Quran that were revealed after this, the surah Qalam. And it's interesting because it's اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم. And then Surah Muzammil, and Rasul says Khadija al cover me. And then Surah Mudaththir, another form of covering. These surahs are in relation to his experience in the cave of Hira. In fact, there's something really unique that people don't appreciate, that even the Quran itself is speaking to Rasul sallam. There's not just random ayats that came to Rasul sallam. What do they mean? Well, Allah Ta'ala says, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق. Now, which human being is sitting there thinking, okay, well, what does that mean now? What's being told to me here? Well, one of the things we learn from the hadith is that Rasulullah was having true dreams. So I've gone off on a tangent here, but I like telling this bit. He was having true dreams. So he knew something's coming. He's not oblivious to it. We know that because Aisha says they were like the light of day. They were clear. So these are not like my dreams where I have to go to someone and say, can you interpret it? They were clear dreams. SubhanAllah, what's also important is it's a sunnah of Rasulullah that every morning he would ask the Sahaba, did anyone have a dream today? We don't do this sunnah anymore, unfortunately. But this was something he did every day. And anyway, so I write down my dreams, as weird as they are, still today. So then, what Allah is telling him probably is what Rasulullah is contemplating about. He's in the cave in Ramadan. You could call it an etikaf, away from his family, from the madness of Makkah, but he can still see the Kaaba from the cave. And Allah Ta'ala saying, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. That what you are thinking about, contemplate, I am the one who created insan. It's me. And then he said, Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram allazi allama bil qalam. Now why is this important? And I'm going to go very quickly. Because Allah is telling Rasulullah that I created you the most blessed of people, insan. I created you in the most humblest form, but it's the most blessed form. When you're in the womb of your mother. Now why is this important? Because some ulama, they say the cave is like being in the womb of your mother. Now this is unique here, because there are many hadith that talk about when the child is in the womb of the mother, there's an angel with them in the womb of the mother. And Jibreel alayhi salam is in the cave with Rasulullah, like being in the womb of a mother. And then Rasulullah entered the cave in one state. But then Allazi allama bil kalam, he left the cave as a prophet. He's been given knowledge now, wahi. The Quran is speaking to him directly. Actually, so these ayahs are not just, random. They're telling him that you were in this state and then you left the most elevated state. I gave you knowledge, and that Allah Ta'ala is the most generous here. And then when Waraka listens to it as a blind man, he hears wahi and he understands that his name is Waraka, the man of knowledge. He understood it in his context. And then said, look, if I was younger, I would support you. And then says that, this is the same as Musa alayhi salam. Why not Isa? Why Musa? Because in the Quran there are many parables between Musa alayhi salam's experience and Rasulullah. This imagination is needed when we're doing history. When insan's imagination is not a deficiency in them where we're just creating fiction. It's hard to understand things without using your imagination when Allah Ta'ala is giving you His words. This is what we historians are doing. And we want you to imagine your future. We want you to imagine your future. And your future is unfortunate, but you have to imagine the possibility that they may destroy Al-Aqsa. You have to imagine it. You have to imagine the possibility that the Israeli state could also be gone. You have to imagine it. You have to imagine it that this Western hegemony may not be here forever. You have to imagine that Muslims might be given one more chance. I keep asking Allah Ta'ala, please give us one more chance to prove to you that we are the Ummah of Rasulullah. I'm sorry. When I used to read the history books in the past, and I used to go, how did they allow the Crusades to happen? How did they allow the Mongol invasion to happen? We allowed many things to happen under our watch, from the genocide in Bosnia, to the genocide in Rwanda, to 2 million people being obliterated in Iraq, to the genocide right now. This is not okay for me. This is not okay. So I'm begging Allah Ta'ala. I said, okay, this ummah, we can get it right. But in order to get it right, we have to imagine that we can get it right. We have to believe that we can get it right. This is why imagination becomes important. So for me, and this will be my last point, what I'm trying to teach you guys is I'm trying to give you that the importance of a historical consciousness is not just about dates, facts, numbers. The idea of being a historian is to give you the understanding of having a consciousness in the way that you think. And that we used to do this. This is part of our tradition. So when people ask me, why are you bringing this on the table right now? I said, I'm not trying to Islamize history. This is not a decolonial project or a post-colonial project. This is going back to the tradition and making it contemporary again. And this is why we need people to write in this way. And this is needed. And this is, wallahi, this is the month of Ramadan, but I only wrote this as a sadaqah jariyah. I don't have kids, and I didn't build a masjid. But the unique thing about books, subhanAllah, is they stay alive after you're dead. And then every time someone reads it, you hope it's a sadaqah jariyah, that you made an effort. And the only important, honestly, the two most important pages in the book is the first page where I praised Allah, and the second page where I praised Rasul and his family. If you don't want to read the rest of the book, I don't mind. Just read those 2 pages, that's sadaqah jariyah for me. And I tell you why, because on the internet, when you're watching the internet, there are videos, but they disappear. But books, I noticed when I gave people books, they said, one sister came to me and she goes, can you sign this book for my son? I said, sure. How old is your son? And she was 4 years old. I said, oh, 4. So then I wrote in the book, inshallah, when you become older and you can read, that when you read these words of mine, that they make a difference to you. I understood that this broke our notion of time. That people would take a book, they'd finish it and they'd give it to somebody else. The books were moving, I could see it. This is our tradition. We write books. The ulama wrote books. Today we're getting lazy, we're doing podcasts all the time. I don't have a problem, I'm on them myself. But what I'm saying to you is the visual format shouldn't take away from this format. The teaching format, the reading and writing format, the ilm format. And what I would like for you, for your community, and I said many last things, but this is, well, I promise my last word. Create an environment in your community where you have a waqf, where you can support young people who want to be scholars, so that they can fulfill this community. And if those scholars choose to go to other countries around the world, they carry the value system of this community. They carry the ideals and values of this community, and this community is still, as a sadaqah jariyah, going somewhere else. It's not just about here. This is what it means to belong to the ummah. This is what I want from you. This is what I'm trying to do, right? And this is what I'm trying to encourage everyone to do, inshallah. So I know this is a little bit different in terms of what maybe some of you might be expecting what I was going to say today. But I wanted to change the way that you think about the way that we do knowledge as Muslims. Okay, inshallah. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, okay, we have half an hour iftar. So thank you very much for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.